Hello, this is post-recording Fohammer speaking. This is going to be a very long video, longer than either of us anticipated. There will be visuals on screen, so wherever possible we have footage or images of all the tanks we're talking about. But it is very podcasty in nature, in that it's not a scripted critical analysis. It's very much two friends who love tanks chatting about tanks for 2 hours. So absolutely feel free to just stick it on in the background or listen to it like you would a podcast. But there will always be interesting stuff on screen if you're watching attentively as well, so enjoy. Also, a huge thank you to my friend Ed for agreeing to do this with me. Right. So, have you seen like tier list videos before? Oh, I need to screen share.
I've never seen videos of them, but I've seen tier lists. So I've seen things like I think actually I know the tier list system from Civ Games.
Nice. Oh, perfect. Yeah. Well, I was thinking that this would be a good way of, because we had that like podcast idea a while back. I was thinking this would be quite a fun kind of like interactive kind of way of doing that, and having like, specific prompts for shit to chat about. So this is like a tank one. If it goes well, we could do other ones. Like we could do ships one, planes one, theater of war one, guns. Yeah, literally. Guns. Yeah,
there's a lot of argument to be had as well about things like, was the MG42 more effective than
than the Bren?
Well, the fact that you had to carry 6 barrels as opposed to 1.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bren best machine gun.
You know what? I'd agree with that.
Yeah, man. I've actually got a Bren gun magazine on my shelf over here that, like, I went to a museum and they just had a crate of old Bren mags that they were selling for £4.
Like, oh, what? I used to love that you used to be able to buy stuff like that. I think you still can in certain places, but it's becoming a lot more rarefied.
Yeah, it's hard to find the locations for it, because this was like a small museum that some farmer was running in like one of his barns. But like, at a big museum you wouldn't get that, and it's hard to find shops that sell that sort of thing.
Have you ever come across the Muckleborough collection?
I don't think so, no. Anyway, right, so this thing. All right.
Rubbing hands together.
Yeah. So,
dear.
I guess if we start with if we start up here with the old Sherman, have you got thoughts on the Sherman?
Well, you see, when I was growing up, I suppose there's kind of 3 different ways and almost like 3 different times that I would consider my views on the Sherman changing. There's the young, listening to Grandad tell his war stories kind of version of the Sherman, that it was crap. It was called the Tommy Cooker. It had such a bad rep. It's not a sexy tank, is it? It doesn't scream just a beautiful piece of like scary machinery. If you saw that coming over the hill, when you think of things like the Tiger coming over the hill in Battle of the Bulge and stuff like that, it evokes fear. It's got that visceral kind of, oh god, we're all run away kind of thing. And the Sherman,
it's like that, oh fuck, a Tiger, and you don't really get that with a Sherman.
With a Sherman, you're like, oh,
yeah,
it's one of those.
Another Sherman. Yeah.
Another Sherman. Yeah, there's however many millions of them, well, thousands of them they built. And then there was my kind of second phase when you start playing war games and stuff, and Shermans tend to be the most prevalent things in war games, and I suppose I kind of warmed to it a bit. And then as I've got older and got way more into the actual history of World War II and how the war was fought, conducted, and won, then all of a sudden your opinion shifts completely. And the Sherman is now, for me, one of my favourite tanks of the war.
Oh, really? Ah, that's really cool. I think I had a similar thing where, like, although I think my opinions changed in a much more sort of shallow way. I think I used to hate it. I think mainly because it was American, and it was American and very popular. And I was like, oh, I think I just used to be very contrarian. But I think it goes through phases, like, of being cool Like, of it being cool to like the Sherman, and then it being cool to be like, oh, well, actually, the Sherman was, you know, it had a shit gun and shit armor, and it, you know, yeah, exactly, the Tommy Cooker thing.
The thing is, I mean, you make a really good point there. It had a shit gun and a shit armor, but did it really? I mean,
well, that's the thing. Against the majority of German tank, like, okay,
well,
you know,
a
Sherman
because here's the thing though, and this is something that I really really love. Tanks don't fight tanks. It's an infantry support vehicle.
Yeah, and I find it interesting that with the guns, because you get the Shermans with the short barrel 75 and the long barrel 76, and the commanders always wanted the 75. It was worse at fighting
what's really
tanks,
interesting is
when
they were developing the Pershing, and then the I can't remember, it's the Army Board of Procurement or something. They did a report and they went out, met the guys in the field, and they were like, okay, you know, do you want this tank? Do you want the, you know, we've got this, we can bring it to you, blah blah blah. And all the commanders said no, just keep this. It's quick, it's easier, it's reliable. You know, it's got smoke shells, it's got everything we need for what it does.
Yeah, it's just a reliable, good fucking tank that they made a lot of. Like, it's good, and as well, even in tank versus tank combat, okay, you know, especially with the short barrel 75, it's not going to really scratch a Tiger, or it's unlikely to. But the majority of the tanks you're going to face aren't actually going to be Tigers. They're going to be Panzer IIIs, Panzer IVs, Stugs.
Well, I mean, even though at those later stages of the war, when German war production was lagging so far behind, you were going to be facing, you know, Panzer 38Ts. You know, the Czech tanks. You were going to be facing old French tanks. You were going to be facing Italian tanks. You were going to be facing Panzer IIs even. You know, you really kind of, you know, yes, those elite Panzer divisions had Panthers, they had Tigers. The vast majority didn't. And I think another great thing about the Sherman is its replaceability. The fact that, you know, you could get a Sherman back on the field within 24 hours of it being knocked out. You know, because it was so easy to take apart, drop a new engine in it, drop a new gearbox in it. Whereas, you know, as we all know, the Tiger's reliability issues are you know, legendary. But the point is though they were unreliable, they took forever to repair anyway.
Yeah.
Whereas the Sherman was just like, oh yeah, and the wheels as well, the bogies on the wheels, you know, oh, you know, blown a wheel off, just pop the bogey off, pop a new one on, job done.
And even if, like with Shermans, even if a tank was damaged, you know, irreparably, they're so easy to mass produce, and they were so mass produced, the crew could just hop in another one. You know, they probably had 10 spare sitting back at base, and then you're going easy.
Yeah, and you've got to think as well. I mean, the man hours required to produce a Sherman are a fraction of the man hours required to produce even a Panzer IV or a Panther.
Yeah,
and yet, in a support role, supporting infantry, they're arguably just as effective.
Absolutely. Yeah, and as well, like the modifiability of the Sherman, right? Like, you have different countries making different variants. You got the Firefly, you've got the French variants of the Sherman, you've got amphibious Shermans, like the Sherman DDs. Like, it's the fucking.
But also as well, it's the versatility of the tank as well. It's a tank that fought in every theatre of the war. You know, it was fighting in the Philippines, it was fighting in you know, Northern Africa, it was fighting in absolutely every condition imaginable, and still worked in all of those conditions, which is just mind-boggling that, you know, it was so versatile. And of course, you know, forgetting, you've got the Sherman bridge layers, the Sherman Arv, you've got the what was it called, the one with the flail on the front, the Minesweeper.
Was that the Crab?
Yeah, I think it is.
So.
The Crab. Yeah. Such a versatile. You know what? I would argue very strongly for putting this in S, because you could make a solid argument for saying the Sherman was a fine example of how the Allies won the war, and a fine example of engineering done properly.
Okay. You know what?
I'm making a strong claim here.
Yeah, you see, at the beginning of this, I was thinking I was probably going to place the Sherman somewhere like A or B, but actually, I think you've convinced me. I'm happy.
You know, I'll tell you what, I'll compromise and say A, because there are probably more. I'd go A, because it still isn't very sexy, is it? You know, sex appeal wise, it's losing out for me.
Yeah, I would agree on that. Okay, cool. A for the Sherman. Nice, good start. The Yanks will be happy. Right, what's next? I'm just gonna pick one out.
Well,
This thing. All right, let's go with this. T-55. Now,
Ooh.
that was a very fucking heavily mass-produced tank, wasn't it? Let me just check. How many numbers were made? Fucking hell. The T-55... 86 to 100,000.
100,000.
That is ludicrous.
Jesus Christ. I think this is one of those situations where you kind of just have to, doff your cap a little bit to the madness that is Soviet mass production of things.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It's bloody gorgeous, and it's pretty much the blueprint for every tank after that ever.
Yeah, especially Soviet ones. Like even you look at the T-90s, and they just look like a slightly squished T-55.
Well,
like they
every T-series tank after that, the T-62, T-64, so on and so forth. They all look pretty much, with more bells and whistles on the side and slightly more, advanced. But yeah, it is that it basically laid down the foundation. How effective it is. I mean, what do you know about its effectiveness?
I don't know a lot. I know that they were they were based on that doctrine of being pretty cheap. Probably they like one-on-one wouldn't stand up to Western tanks, but they were fucking mass-produced to hell.
They were like 5 to 1,
and they were
in most circumstances.
Yeah, that's the thing. Is just the overwhelming numbers of them, and as well, I know they were built based around like the Eastern and Western tank doctrine was quite different in that sort of NATO tank doctrine, sort of in the Cold War, was very much defensive because they always assumed that if there was a war, it would be the Russians invading. So you get like things with the Abrams M60s, Challengers, anything like that. They're designed to fight from a hull down position and snipe tanks, and they're very expensive, very accurate. Whereas the T-55s are designed to, and most other Soviet tanks are designed to get up in your face quickly and overwhelm your defensive tank positions.
Yeah, it's an iron wave. So they've got incredible cross-country mobility. I've seen videos of them wading and stuff like that, and it's absolutely incredible what they can cross. Because, of course, if you think about it, they've effectively got to cross the whole of Europe as quickly as possible. I mean, that's what the doctrine demands. I mean, look, I know relatively little about this tank, I will admit. I think it's pretty. I think it's for how has it been effective? Because in every conflict it's come into in the hands of various insurgencies and everything. When faced with even vaguely stiff resistance, it's, as far as I'm aware, not fared particularly well. But is that unfair to it because it's a 1945 design going up against 1960s, 1970s US and Western technology sold to whatever insurgency they were supporting? So I think it's a really difficult one to measure. I think for the pure fact for me that it's basically set the standard for Soviet design. It's a really pure reflection of Soviet armored doctrine. It's pretty, it's quick, it's all round good. I'd say it's, for me, I mean, I want to hear your thoughts. I went first on the last one, actually, so.
Well, yeah, I think, I'd agree with what you said there. It's also, I think it's very iconic. It's an iconic tank of not just sort of early Soviet, early Cold War Soviet, military, but also of, as you say, pretty much every insurgency in the world that can get their hands on them does. And I think it speaks to the tank, to how good it is that everyone wants them, even though it is outdated and probably pretty cheap, and it will not stand up to Western tanks. Everyone wants them, so it must be good value for money at least. But I don't know. I think, for me, I'm thinking B tier. What are you thinking?
I would solidly agree with that. I can't make a good enough argument for it being less. Put it that way. Yeah. I can't make an argument for it being any better, but I can't make an argument for it being any worse.
Yeah, cool. All right. T-55 in B tier. Nice.
Should we try and alternate between old and modern?
Yeah, sure. Let's go for it. Let's grab something old. This is old. The FT-17.
Now, well. Go on. I mean, where do you want to start with this?
Well, I mean, personally, I don't actually know a huge amount about it. It was obviously one of the iconic tanks of the First World War. And I know it has been described by some people as the first modern tank because it's like the first tank with a single gun in a turret. And
it's an awful lot of its design features you can draw a parallel with today, and you could argue that it is the father, if not the grandfather, I'd say, because obviously you mark it, that's arguably the granddaddy of tanks, isn't it? And then this, I would argue, is the daddy of tanks, or the uncle of tanks, or something, because if you look at that tank and how it was used and how its influence through every single tank, apart from really the Stridsvagn S tank and hull mounted tank destroyers and self-propelled artillery, that's artillery, every tank following has followed that design principle. I think for that alone it has to get a significant amount of praise.
Yeah, I would agree. And as well, you look at the picture of the Abrams next to it, and it's immediately obvious how one is then an evolution from the other, despite how ancient the FT is. And I think it speaks to it being pretty good as well that during the Second World War, it did see some use in German service, like the captured French ones. Even though this use wasn't, they kind of kept it out of frontline combat and they used it mostly for policing insurgencies and that sort of thing.
Here's a good example for you.
It was still good enough to at least use.
Service history 1917 to 49, World War I, Russian Civil War, Estonian War of Independence, Turkish War of Independence, Polish-Soviet War, the Chinese Wars, the Rif War, Great Syrian Revolt, Brazilian Revolution, Brazilian Constitutionalist War, Chinese Civil War, Spanish Civil War, Winter War, World War II, Franco-Thai War, and the Arab-Israeli War, and the Soviet-Afghan War. As well, it goes beyond just the idea of there being a turret with a gun, the main armament being a rotatable turret, but it's also the rear engine design, the way the tracks are driven, it's the way the tracks are as well, not being those round the whole tracks. It's that the entire design ethos of it, and the idea of it being at the time a really quick tank as well. And that idea of speed and punching a hole and being able to exploit gaps in the enemy and effectively being armored cavalry. And it's an incredible piece of design.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I heard it compared somewhere that the FT-17s were kind of used they were like ants. They would kind of swarm across the battlefield in these because even though compared to anything post First World War they were pretty slow, for the First World War they were quick, they were maneuverable.
They were very quick.
And yeah, exactly. Like you say, you can exploit gaps in the line with them. They can zip around the battlefield. And in a day where anti-tank weapons are pretty scarce, they're just, they're going to shrug off bullet fire. Unless someone happens to have a field gun pointed at them, there's not a lot you can do to stop them zipping around the place.
And often as well, because of communications at the time, it'd be very difficult to get a field gun aimed at them quick enough.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I think for the time, for their effectiveness on the Western Front, and again they were very easily mass produced, there were thousands of the things, for its influence in tank design forever. I arguably feel this needs its own category. It needs a category called G or something, which is like granddaddy of tanks or something, because it's I'd put it in S because it's.
I can probably make a G tier somewhere.
It's the OG tank, isn't it? At the end of the day,
it is absolutely. Right, I'll stick it in S, and what I'll do is in post I'll make a G tier above S, and I'll put it in that.
yeah. It's kind of like a feisty little kitten, isn't it? You look at it and you go, "Aww." And then your arm's covered in scratches and it's knocked everything off your window ledge and that kind of thing.
Oh my god, I want a little cat-size FT-17 to zip around the house and just get up to hijinks.
God. I'm sure there's some Japanese animators who'll make a series out of it.
Oh hell yeah. Yeah.
We need to go and pitch to Konami or something.
Let's go with let's get the Abrams out of the way.
The Abrams.
All right. Personally, I'm kind of not a huge fan of the Abrams, but I think I'm probably skewed by the fact that it's everywhere. It's in every piece of media. It's in every war film. We're so like saturated with the Abrams that I think I'm sick of it. It's a good tank.
It's not just a good tank though, is it? I mean, like, the Abrams is everywhere because it is everywhere. It's been around for the best part of 30 years. More now, I think.
I think it was about 40. I think it was 1981
it was built in the 80s, wasn't
like
it? Yeah. So 40 years, sorry. Yeah, Christ, that makes me feel old. Its armor is still up to scratch. It's been very easily upgradable over the years. It's improved its ammunition, it's improved its gun, it's improved its gun sights, it's improved its usability, its armor, its maneuverability, its efficiency. Over the years, it was designed as a platform that could be upgraded and has been upgraded to make sure that it is still one of the most feared fighting vehicles on the planet. Yes, now against more kind of like, the T-90 and the more modern tanks coming out of China and Russia, it needs upgrading again, and I believe there is new tanks in development. But the point being is it has stayed a mainstay of the Western arsenals for the best part of 40 years, and it's fought in many conflicts incredibly effectively. Its armor, the Cobham armor, still incredibly effective. Its guns incredible. Its accuracy is incredible. As a fighting vehicle, there's not a lot bad you can say about it, really.
I saw a meme the other day that was basically pointing out that the time between the M1 Abrams being introduced and now, when it's still in use and still going to be in use for a long time, is the same amount of time between the M3 Lee being in use and the Abrams coming out. Like, that massive change in technology is...
But that also goes to show you as well about design philosophy, doesn't it? And you're no longer building a tank, you're building a weapons platform. A weapons platform that can be upgraded over the course of 40 years to still maintain its viability in the modern age.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like I think most modern tanks are like that. I mean, you see that with the Challengers, with the Leopards. Yeah. They're designed to be used for a bloody long time. And it's the same in aircraft and everything. Like the B-52s have been used for 50 years, and they're planning to use them for like another 40 or something.
The F-15's been around for a very long time.
Yeah. Oh yeah, here is the image I was talking about. It's like that. I don't know.
I'm solidly saying S here because to say, especially when you threw out that statistic of it's been around for the same time as the difference between the Lee and it's still effective to this day. It's still fighting to this day. It's still an active combat tank to this day, and I believe it's intended to be for at least another 10 years.
Yeah.
That longevity and that adaptability and its combat record is impeccable as well. You can't fault it, really, can you? Crews love it as well. If you've ever a fantastic YouTuber who I'd recommend going and watching, I'm sure you've seen it as well. The Chieftain, Nicholas Moran.
Yep.
He's an ex-Abrams driver, and you'll never hear him say bad about the Abrams.
Oh, I didn't know he was an Abrams driver. That's the thing, actually. Now that you point it out, like the thing about crews loving it is most tanks that I can think of, like you can come up with at least a complaint that people have about it. But off the top of my head, I just can't come up with a complaint that I've heard about the Abrams.
No, this is the thing. It's got a lot going for it, and not a lot not going for it. Where's the fault in it?
Yeah. You know what? I'm happy to stick this in S tier. All right, I think that's good. Right. Let's go back to something old. Ooh, well,
we've had a British, we've had a French. What about a German tank? I feel like we need to talk about German tank.
Yeah. How about this? Let's go with the Panzer 38T.
The Czech tank.
Could be a 35T, but I'll roll them both into one because they're basically the same.
I think the Czech. I mean, to be fair, considering it was developed before prior to 1939, I think its use as a light recon tank and its effectiveness all round, you can't fault it. It was a bloody good tank. Obviously, it has a lot of shortcomings, but are they shortcomings inherent of the German military? I hesitate to use machine, but war industry, or are they fault to the tanks itself? I think for what it is, which is realistically a light recon tank, it was very, very good.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. I mean, they were used, I think, long after they became, essentially obsolete. Like, even, when they were no longer up to scratch for fighting, exactly, they made fantastic recon vehicles. I know they were used a lot on the Eastern Front. I know they were used, after the D-Day landings on the Western Front. So, like, and as well, I think, I mean, from what I've heard, at least, they were very much at least on par with any of the German designs from the same time, like the Panzer IIs, Panzer Is, and they were used
absolutely,
like so heavily by the Germans. And also, I see, to me, the Panzer 38s have the same kind of appeal as the FT-17, in that they're kind of a cute tank. Like, they're a little cheeky. They've got a decent gun. That 37 mil. I think it's a 37. I think they stuck the German gun in it. I could be wrong. I don't know. I think it's a cute, fun little tank, and it was good for its time, personally.
Yeah, it was a 37.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was relatively quick. It would do 42 kilometers an hour, range of 200 kilometers. It was quick. It effectively speaking, for the role it was designed, or rather for the role it was used in the invasion of France, it was a fantastic asset for the Germans to have, because it was quick, it had good range, it had a decent armament, and it was, relatively speaking, as far as I'm aware, reliable. And it was relatively quick to produce as well. It's not an over-engineered monstrosity of a tank. At the same time, we have to look at its entire operational history, and by the time we're reaching 1941, 1942, it's vastly obsolete against what it's coming up against. The armor, I know the frontal armor was increased to 50 millimeters from its original, I believe, 20.
That's not going to make much difference. Like, that's not going to really do anything against anti-tank weapons.
Precisely, or indeed against a lot of things, really. The fact is, and the sad fact is, with a lot of German tanks, is they were used long after their viability on the field would normally allow, and as a result, you do have to judge it on its operational history. And yes, it was fantastic in the Battle of France. Was it fantastic because it never came up against decent French opposition that was organised properly? Yes. Was it fantastic as a reconnaissance tank and quick? Yes. Did it ever get used in that role post 1941? No, not really. And was it horrendously outclassed by that time? Yes. And also, again, it because of its size and because of its gauge, and because of the size of its turret as well, it's very difficult to upgrade the gun. Because obviously it's a small turret ring as well, so you can't really increase the size of the turret easily. And also, I think if you look at it from an operational point of view as well, it's another design added to an already very overwhelmed German arsenal of vehicles that they need to provide different spares for, different ammunition for, a different set of training manuals for. It's another different vehicle that the German army has to learn how to use and support with an already overburdened war industry and already overburdened supply lines. It makes it arguably the benefit of having, let's say, however many they captured from Czechoslovakia at the start of 1939, or prior to 1939, the strain that then places on the German armaments industry arguably outweighs the benefit of having the extra tanks.
That's interesting. Well, it sounds like you know quite a lot more about it than I do, so that's good. Interestingly, I'm just looking here at the the modifications that were built on the chassis of the 38T, and it's really quite a lot more than I realized. So obviously, we mentioned the Hetzer, and I believe you mentioned, what was the other? You mentioned something else. I can't remember what it was. The Lukes.
Was a development from it.
That was it. But you also, of course, get the Marder series of tank destroyers, which are, I believe, quite widely used. The Grill self-propelled gun, there were flak panzers built on the chassis. So it seems like even when the tank was obsolete, the chassis itself was still considered quite widely useful by the Germans. And as well, one thing I've remembered about this tank is quite interesting. I think it was post-war, some of them were sold to the Swedish army, and the Swedish made a modification on it that allowed it to fire armor-piercing discarding sabot rounds.
Oh, really?
Firing APDS out of a Panzer 38T is just bizarre. But that was what post-war Sweden was up to.
In anything like War Thunder or World of Tanks, because that would just be the most bonkers low-tier tank ever.
Oh, it's in War Thunder. That's why I know about it. Oh, wow. Apparently, the Swedish actually built some fairly advanced tank destroyers on the chassis of this thing. Look at this. Apparently, this was built on the Panzer 38 chassis. That's kind of cool. I mean, I'm just going down a rabbit hole here. This is kind of irrelevant, but like
just the 38T rabbit hole.
Yeah,
here we go again.
The Swedish tanks they got me feeling some kind of way. I don't know. The Swedish
I love
go off with their tanks.
Oh God, yeah! Christ Almighty. So, the Swedish were already ordering them in 1940, but the Germans then seized them for their own use. So the Alf S 90 were ordered by Sweden in February 1940, but seized by Germany. That's bonkers. And then Christ Almighty, the Stritzfahn M41 was to replace those seized Alf S. Oh my God, that is crazy. And then the Marder 3, the Grill, Flak Panzer 38, Reconnaissance, Jagdpanzer, Flame Tank. Its operational drain on the German war economy versus its use, I would say, outweighs the benefit of it as a fighting vehicle. It was a relatively speaking effective fighting vehicle. However, we're talking about the T-38T, not the Marder, not the Hetzer.
That is true. We're not talking about the modifications.
So I'd say for me, it's solidly a C. It was effective early on. However, its continued use far outweighed its effectiveness.
You know what? I was actually going to say C as well. So I'm glad we can agree on that. Yeah, it's that's the thing. It's not super effective, but personally, I just find it a really interesting tank.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, and it was effective early on, but it was used until 1945, and unfortunately, in 1945, it was woefully out. You've got to think. I mean, it's going to be coming up against things like IS-2s, IS-1s even. That's just not fair. It's not fair at coming up against the T-34-85, really.
Absolutely. Right. Nice. That's 5 down. A lot to go. Okay, how about... Alright, let's go back to a modern one. Ooh. This fucker. Have you seen this? This thing is a Korean tank, the K1. And what the Koreans did with the K1, it's an indigenous tank, and it's supposed to be quite good. But what they did with it is they basically took an Abrams and bonked it with a hammer and flattened it a little bit. And made that. Have you heard about this tank?
No, but I'm looking at it now. The K1 88 tank. South Korean.
Yeah.
Oh, so it's basically kind of like a really versatile tank for the fact that it has to do mountains and swamp.
Oh, is that what it's designed for? I hadn't really read the wiki.
Apparently, yeah.
Interesting.
Oh, and it's fire control system developed by Samsung, so that'll overheat and set it on fire.
Samsung. Good. Oh wow, they've built 1,500 of them. That's a lot of tanks for a small country like South Korea. But then I guess, considering their neighbors, they need a bit of a military.
Yeah, I mean, they can't entirely rely on US assistance, can they? It would be a bit unfair. Saying that, production designer Chrysler, so General Dynamics. So it's basically an American tank.
It's basically just a slightly squashed Abrams. Yeah. I mean, the thing is, it's one of these tanks that's quite difficult to speak about because, as far as I can see, it's not ever seen combat. So like, we don't know how it performs. So like, just based on surface level opinions, do you have any thoughts?
So I'm just having a look at its specs here now. So it's hydro pneumatic suspension, which is pretty good. Torsion bar in the middle. It'll do 40 miles an hour on the road, 25 cross country. It's got an operational range of 500k. It's a diesel engine, which is fine. It's got a 105mm main armament. I mean, what do you think surface-wise?
I don't know. See, my opinions are mostly based on it looks kind of funny, which is the only reason I added it in, and also mainly I added it because I think it's quite interesting that South Korea makes their own tanks. But I don't know.
I mean, B.
I was between like B and C just because like it's kind of.
I'd go with B based on the fact it's got a really freaking good gun.
Yeah, that's fair, and I think C would imply that it was kind of just bad, so I don't think it would be fair to put it that low.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I don't know enough about it to diss it that much.
Speaking of bad, let's grab this thing now. I don't know exactly what this is, but I know it's Japanese, so it's probably very shit. I think it's a.
Let me have a look.
It's one of the early war Japanese tanks. It's going to be like a Ho-Ro or a Ha-Go or a Chi-Go. I don't know. They're all called things like that.
Oh god. Let's have a look. Let's see what they look like. Chiro.
Okay. I think this is a Ha-Go.
Oh, Type 95 Ha-Go light tank. Yeah. Okay.
I mean, I'm already thinking, right? Like
it is. Yeah, it is a Ha-Go.
Somewhere down here, maybe like a little even below that. Maybe like just peeking.
No. Let's not be harsh. Let's make an argument for the Ha-Go. I'm sure there's something that can be redeemed with.
Well, okay. To be fair, now I don't know anything about the Ha-Go specifically, but about Japanese tanks in general. Whilst they fucking could not stand up to anything the Americans brought to the table, from what I've heard, they did go ham against the Chinese, simply because the Chinese had even worse tanks. I'm pretty sure the Chinese were still using FT-17s, like first.
They were, yeah. They didn't have any indigenous tanks at the time, as far as I'm aware.
Yeah, and they were just getting the oldest and cheapest of imported tanks.
Largely from America.
Whereas even though Japanese tanks were pretty shit all round, they were better than what the Chinese
had. It was developed for the war against China. Oh, see, this I hate already. Only the commander was seated in the turret, which is a relatively common thing in early war tanks.
One-man turrets
for observation, loading, aiming, firing. How on earth? And as well as decision-making and commanding the crew.
Yeah. I mean, that was
operated turret.
That was the same problem we got in a lot of early war French tanks, wasn't it? The French loved the one-man turret, which is shit because you're supposed to be able to command the tank, communicate with other crews, and operate the gun all by yourself, which is preposterous. I think... See, I might be thinking of a different tank here, but I believe it's the Type 95 where the main gun has a weird thing where you can actually move the main gun around without turning the turret. Like, you can kind of grab it and move it almost how you would a coaxial gun, a little bit, within the turret mount.
That sounds horrible.
Which is fucking weird. I saw a tank museum video on it.
It was developed into an armoured railroad car.
Whoa! I kind of want to see that.
It was fitted with a retractable wheel arrangement underneath that enables it to run on wet rails. Oh my god, it's the Type 95 SOKA. Sulky. That is hilarious. I love that. I love the idea of being like, haha, we're going to sabotage this railroad. Oh Christ, there's a tank.
I like that. That is. Imagine just seeing this thing with with the tracks stationary, just zooming towards you along a railroad. Like, what the fuck? I love that. Could it hook up to trains?
I don't know, but I think that's incredible. So apparently, this tank was considered one of the best of its type in 1935, being armed with a 37mm cannon and powered by a diesel engine. Which, a diesel engine in 1935?
Oh.
I tell you what, though, you know what? Its speed was about 18 mile per hour cross country.
That's not bad.
Good lord.
Maybe I've underestimated this thing.
So, now, yeah, here you go. So, the M3 Stuart, which was its kind of contemporary, the tank it came up against later in the war, which was 6 years later, would do 20 mile per hour cross country. So 5 years earlier, it was only 2 miles per hour slower than the Stuart.
That is impressive, to be fair, the speed. Although, in other aspects, the Stuart probably fucking smashed this thing.
Yeah, but it was also 5 years younger.
It was also, the Stuart was a much later tank, that is fair.
Oh my god. The Type 95 proved sufficient against opposing infantry in campaigns in Manchuria, Chinese, and the Chinese National Revolutionary Army. Oh god, the Chinese only had 3 tank battalions consisting of Vickers export tanks and Panzer Is.
Yeah, that's
oh no,
sad.
an Italian CV-33s. Oh dear.
No. I didn't put any Italian tanks in this, but
oh, why not? That would have been hilarious.
I should have done.
That would have at least fleshed out the bottom of the table.
I was gonna say, yeah, we would have had a full F tier at least. If we do a part 2, I'll make sure to stick some Italian tanks in there. We've already got a lot of ideas for part 2.
You know what? I'm gonna solidly say, because this served for 10 years and it actually seemed to do all right. You know what? I thought this was going to be an easy kind of D or an E. I'd say this is a solid C or a B for me.
Do you think so?
I think so. Having read about that, I'm not being funny, but in 1935, to be able to do 18 mile per hour cross country with a 200k range against the Chinese for what it was designed for, that tank was impeccable.
You know what? I could compromise on a C, but I don't think I could go above a C.
No, I'd solidly agree with that. I'd say a C for that. I'm surprised by how good that tank actually sounds.
I am surprised, I'll be honest, because all I really knew about Japanese tanks is I knew they did well against the Chinese, but generally they were utterly useless against American tanks later in the war. But then maybe that's not fair, because this was quite an old tank by that point. So, yeah, cool. Let's see, back to a modern one. Ooh, okay. I think this is quite a divisive tank. What are your thoughts on the Leopard 2A5? Or 2A6, 2A7, they're all basically the same.
The Leopard 2?
Yeah, we'll just say Leopard 2 in general.
In my opinion, it kind of undoes all of the good ideas of it kind of flies in the face of Western armored doctrine for me, which is that idea of a defensive thing. It's very maneuverable. It's very quick. It's got, to be fair, its gun stabilization is immense. Have you seen the thing where they put a pint of beer on top of the gun barrel?
Yes.
And drive it around.
Oh my god, I have seen that.
It stays dead level.
That is. I love that video.
That'd be cray. I'm just throwing that out there.
It gets points for that for sure.
Oh, 100% it gets points for that. Look, the Leopard 2, I'm not a fan. I don't like how it looks. I don't get its design principle in that its armor is really quite poor and it's really maneuverable in a kind of defensive mind.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on it? Because I must say, I'm not particularly au fait on modern tanks.
No, I don't know a huge amount. I mean, I know a lot more about Second World War than modern tanks. So, I'm not hugely informed. But yeah, no, I would agree. It's like it is made to be a mobile tank. The armor isn't as I think it's not up to scratch with it's good, but it's not up to scratch with things like the Abrams or the T90s or the Challengers, right? And I also do not like the way it looks. Well, okay.
I think it's ugly as hell.
I like the way it looks before they added the big triangular spaced armor on the front. I thought that looked kind of nice with the big flat front of the turret. But with the big spaced armor thing, I'm not a fan of it. And also...
the arrow shape, the kind of like... I really don't like it.
Yeah, and from what I've seen, I actually watched a video a little while ago specifically about that armor edition. And apparently it's just not great. So some people would assume, and I assumed before finding out, that like that was just extra composite. But it's not composite, it's spaced armor. And the idea is that if a Sabo... Not Sabo. If a Sabo round penetrates that piece of the armor, the space inside will allow it to tumble and therefore lose penetrative power. But the problem is, because they've designed it in that arrowhead fashion, that's only going to happen if it hits the point of the arrowhead, right? If it hits like the top or the bottom of the arrowhead, then there's a lot less space, and that's not really going to have an effect.
Because there is that. I mean, the whole thinking behind sloped armor, which is why you would have an arrow shape in the first place. The sloped armor is to increase relative armor thickness over, relative to the direction of shot hitting.
Yeah,
that's or to increase the chance of deflection. Now, unfortunately, with modern rounds, their penetrating power is such that those two concepts, unless taken to the absolute extreme, don't really stand up anymore.
Yeah, deflection's not going to happen. And because if this was extra, composite armor or something, or even just a big fat piece of steel, then sure, okay. Yeah, but it's not. It's spaced armor, which is kind of irrelevant at this point.
Like, spaced armor would work against like a shaped charge.
Yeah, but no
one fires that anymore.
Exactly, especially not against an MBT. Like, that wouldn't do anything anyway.
Nothing the Russians have firing at this is in any way is that going to be effective.
No.
Also, it looks freaking hideous.
It does.
Absolutely hideous.
Some people love it, but I just I'm not into it at all.
Well, I'm not being funny. They're wrong.
Yeah, well, they are. If you're going to go with a slope, make it just a nice, a one-directional slope, like with the Abrams or the Challenger or any other modern tank. Sorry, I'm just getting a phone call. I'll be a second.
Yes, it's quick, but it's not that quick. It'll only do 42.
That's the thing. It's kind of a middle ground on everything in not a great way. Like, it's quick, but it's not as quick as a light tank would be, and it's armored, but it's not as heavily armored as
it's not got carbon
as the equivalent.
It's a tank that flies in the face of what you would understand German defensive doctrine to be. It's a tank that's basically designed very well to shoot on the move at targets. So I suppose they're going for wide open spaces. Let's run around the Russian tanks. But the volume of fire you'd expect to be coming in would, completely negate that advantage. So by that metric, I'd put it pretty much. I'd say a D or an E for this one. And also, I hate how it looks.
You think? Yeah. Okay. I could go with a D. I don't think I could put it as low as an E personally, but I'd be happy going with D because I'm not a fan. But you certainly know more about this particular vehicle than I do. So yeah, cool. I mean, we could just be wrong as well, but this is like half serious, half shit post.
That's not why we make videos like this. This is our opinion, so therefore we're not wrong.
Exactly. Right. Cool. Okay. I tell you what. We had a Sherman earlier. Let's pop out the Sherman Jumbo. You familiar with the Jumbo?
The Jumbo, correct me if I'm wrong, was just a bigger, upgunned, heavily armoured version of the Sherman, wasn't it?
Yeah, so it wasn't upgunned. It was just... they added just a shitload of armour to it, increasing it to, I think effective thickness, when you take the slope into account, was about 6 inches. It was like 152 millimeters, roughly.
Yeah.
Which made it into basically a proper heavy tank. And initially the Jumbos were all armed with the 75, but some of them did get field modified to have the 76 as well, which would pretty much put them on par with the Tiger. American tank crews had this thing of they loved to stick sandbags and concrete onto their tanks. And they did it a lot with the Shermans, even though everyone told them not to, because A, it's barely going to make any difference as armor, and B, it will just make the transmission break. And for some reason, so they made the Jumbos, which were designed to actually be heavier, and then the crews still added sandbags and concrete to them anyway, even though they were already incredibly thickly armored, and then broke the transmissions and the road wheels again. So like, I don't know. But aside from that, yeah, it was a good tank. I think they made about 300 or so of them, and what they would generally do is they'd have them like mixed in with the other Shermans. So whenever there was a Sherman column advancing, they would always put a Jumbo at the front, to like take the first shots. So anything below an 88 wasn't going to do it.
I'm reading here that it was classified as an assault tank.
Yeah.
So, it's like a line breaker, isn't it? But only 300 built, though. I mean, that's a tiny, tiny, tiny number.
It is, yeah. It was like less than 1% of the actual Shermans. But because they kind of mixed them in and used them at like the front of columns, I suppose that helped their effectiveness.
Yeah. I mean... I suppose this is a tricky one, because a lot of why we put the Sherman so high up was because of its versatility and its upgradability, and this is effectively an upgraded Sherman. In almost every single way. I mean, what do you feel about this one? I don't feel particularly strongly about this one. I feel the Sherman's been well represented at A.
Yeah, that's.
And I think realistically, though, you've got to consider that this was a stopgap for the Pershing.
Yes. That is true.
And as a stopgap, it's still not going to reliably stop an 88.
No. Well, an 88 would generally have to get lucky. Like, you're probably not going to pierce the frontal hull plate. They were usually, if they were knocked out by 88s, it was usually either side shots or like mantlet shots, from what I've seen.
Yeah. So with that being the case, then it was a fairly successful tank, because the Germans never really upgunned from the 88.
Yeah. So, I don't know. I mean, I'd be happy to just stick it with the Sherman on A, because it's, I don't know.
I'd almost stick it with A kind of overlapping, because, I mean, it's there by merit of it being a Sherman at the end of the day. It's kind of like, you can't really downgrade it, because then that's undoing all the arguments we had in favour of the Sherman.
Yeah.
It didn't have any problems with it. The tank crews all loved it. It was effective in its role. You can't really say much more about it, really, can you?
Yeah, that's fair. A lot of these tanks that I've added in, I've realised there's not an awful lot of argument you can actually make for them, but a lot of them I just added because they're cool. And I think the Jumbo's pretty cool.
There's a fair few I can see around here that we could have a good discussion about.
I mean, while we're on it, we could talk about the Firefly, which is just a Sherman but with a British gun, therefore better.
I would strongly agree with that. However, it's not a tank.
Are you going to call it a tank destroyer?
It's a tank destroyer. Technically, it's self-propelled artillery.
Are you sure about that? I think it still classifies as a tank. No, it's not. It's got like pretty much the regular Sherman turret, but modified for the larger gun.
Firefly tank.
I'm sure it counts as a tank. Sherman Firefly was a tank used by the United Kingdom.
Okay.
Yeah,
that is Wikipedia though.
That is Wikipedia, but yeah. I mean, you might be thinking of some other tank destroyers, like, because the Americans loved their M10 Wolverines, M18 Hellcats.
I'm thinking of the Hellcat, aren't I? That was open topped.
Yeah, the Hellcat was pretty similar to the Sherman, but just lightly armored.
Because that isn't a tank, because it's open topped.
Yeah, that's a tank destroyer.
I mean, yeah, you can't really. There's literally nothing bad you can say about this. I think it's got to go in at A, maybe an A+, not quite an S.
Yeah, I could see it as like in the middle here. honestly.
I mean, I'd agree with that. You know, for all the same reasons, the Sherman is good. It's a Sherman's chassis, you know, but with that beautiful, beautiful gun.
Yeah, the 17-pounder.
Yeah, that's it.
Fucking
17-pounder.
Best gun of the war. Absolutely stunning weapon. I think it goes
had
to
a higher
show.
muzzle velocity than the Pak 88 as well. You know.
Did it? I didn't know that.
I believe so. I was heard an argument about that the other day.
I know some of the right by the end of the war, the 17-pounders were being modified to use discarding sabot rounds as well. Like some of the first British sabots were used on 17-pounders. I don't know if they ever. I don't think they ever used them in the Fireflies, but I know some of the. I think Comets ended up using them, and I know the first evolution of the Centurion, which had the 17-pounder, used them as well. I believe. Yeah. So like. Yeah, very advanced gun. And I think it just goes to show their effectiveness that they did that thing where they camouflaged the end of the barrel to make it look like a short barrel 75 because the Germans would always target the Firefly.
Yeah, clever, isn't it? Yeah, because they knew that was the big threat.
I think this picture actually really goes to show that quite well because like that, I think...
You genuinely, looking at that through a pair of grubby binoculars a mile distant, you wouldn't know. Yeah. You wouldn't see that.
Absolutely. Like when it's a small image, it's already kind of hard to tell that it's not
and with a bit of dust as well. Think about the dust being kicked up, the smoke. Oh, you'd think that's a Sherman.
Absolutely.
Clever camo, that is. Very clever camo.
Very clever. And it just, goes to show how, obviously effective they were. So, like, yeah, I think A+ is a good spot for it. Yeah, right.
So, what next?
What's next? Let's pop back to something modern. How about the T90? Just get away from the Allied tanks. Have you got many thoughts on the T90?
As far as I'm aware, the T90 is their newest one, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like the latest big MBT out of Russia.
Yeah.
Aside from like the T14 Armata, but I don't really know anything about that. I just know that people.
Yeah, that's the new one, isn't it? The super scary one.
Yeah.
Personally, I think it's a terrifying weapon system. It's quick. It's got a really interesting armor system on the turret that we don't know much about, but it's basically I think it's meant to be the Russian version of Cobham, and it's meant to be bloody effective against the sabot round. I think it's effective against one sabot round, and then anything else around that area then becomes a lot less effective. So,
yeah, because don't the Russians use, unlike Western tanks, don't the Russians use like heavy ERA? Because whereas I believe Western tanks mainly use ERA that counters shaped charges, stuff like RPGs, that sort of thing. Yes, from what I've seen, the Russians use a type of ERA that's actually effective against sabot, whereas that's not really what Western ERAs use. And so, that's why exactly it's like effective against one shot. But usually, you're not going to take more than one shot to one specific area in like modern tank combat. Like if you're getting shot at, you're getting out of there.
Yeah, the Contact 5 system it's called, yeah.
That's it, Contact 5,
It's, able to defeat modern piercing, fin-stabilized, discarding sabot. But as far as I'm aware, it's a relative. It's almost like an ablative system. So once it's taken a hit in one area, that area then becomes significantly less effective.
Yeah.
However, the fact that it can take one makes it an incredibly scary proposition to go up against. As far as I'm aware, it's got a very good electronic warfare suite to jam missiles. It's got a really good gun sight, as far as I'm aware. It's got a good engine. It's kind of like the Russians moving away from their philosophy of let's just build loads of them and kind of going, let's build lots of them, but not as many, but they're also going to be very good. Yeah.
Also, who doesn't like big red eyes? Like the IR dazzlers on that thing are just iconic.
You know what? You look at it and it's just a pretty tank, isn't it? It looks like a tank should look.
Yeah, definitely. It's like, I love that it's got that same Russian rounded turret aesthetic, but also with like the spiky, add-on armor. It's a very.
When you're a kid and you draw a tank, you draw that.
Yeah, like I think different tanks often have different personalities, like in the way they look, right? Like we've talked about certain tanks being cute. This is scary. This is like a monster tank. Like
this is it's the tank of nightmares, isn't it? And I suppose that's exactly what they're going for. They want people to be scared of it. At the end of the day, it's a scary fighting vehicle. It's supposedly just as capable as an Abrams. Obviously, it's absolutely not a shame that they've never gone into combat against each other.
But it would be interesting to see. Are we thinking like A tier maybe?
I'm solid A tier. Yeah, I mean, I think the only reason we can't put this at S tier is because it's not as combat proven as the Abrams. It's not been in service as long, so I would say probably combat wise, it's probably every bit as equivalent. The Abrams is up there because it's been in service for 40 years.
Right. What's next? Oh, well, in the top left is the KV-2. What do you think about the KV-2?
I knew you'd put this in here.
Well, I also put the KV-1 in here as well, because I have differing opinions on both. Actually, I tell you what, should we start with the KV-1, and then we'll go on to the KV-2? How do you feel about the KV-1?
How I feel about the KV series in general is that it's a really solid series of tanks. I mean, the Russian design philosophy at the time was just magnificent when it came to designing tanks. Rough, rugged, effective. Yeah, they were. They were just rugged, versatile pieces of equipment that were every bit, if not superior, to the contemporaries at the time. Action reports of the KV-1, really effective tank. It looks mean, it looks Russian, it looks welded together by a group of illiterate peasantry, but that's what it is. It's very Russian, isn't it? You look at that and you go, it's Russian. There's no other country would have built that.
Absolutely. It's very Second World War Russian. The KV-1, I think it used to be probably my favorite tank, and it's still one of my favorites. It's
up there for me.
Something about it. It is just exactly that heavy ruggedness. Like you look at a lot of them have that just straight. Like you can see it on that in the variant in that picture there, just riveted on massive side plate armor. It's just a pretty tank. And it's like in the early war, its service record was absolutely ludicrous. Like the early German tanks, this thing was fighting Panzer IIs, Panzer IIIs, 38Ts, and like very early Panzer IVs. They just couldn't deal with it. Like they just couldn't penetrate its armor. And
at the end of the day, the KV-1 and the T-34 were the reason for the need for Tiger.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I think it was Kursk that the Tiger and the Panther first showed up. And like that was the first time that the Germans could really stand up properly to the Russian tanks. There was a particular battle with the KV-1s. The Battle of, I can't pronounce its name, but there was an engagement where, here we go. So there was 5 KV-1s that were waiting to ambush a German convoy of tanks and other vehicles. And when the combat began, the first KV-1 began firing and told the others not to fire. That lone KV-1 destroyed 22 German tanks before it ran out of ammunition, and then told the other KV-1s to start firing. And the other KVs killed another 21 German tanks. That was a total of 43 German tanks destroyed by 5 KV-1s, with not a single KV-1 lost. And one of the KV-1s, the one that fired initially, after the battle, they checked their tank and counted a total of 135 hits on their tank, with none of them penetrating.
Well, from what I'm reading here, the only gun that was even relatively effective was the 88.
Yeah, and those would have at that time been like towed
incredibly rare
weapons.
Well, at that time it was a flat gun. It wasn't even thought of as a. And in fact, it was the Eastern Front that made them think, actually, this 88, maybe we should be using this.
Maybe we need this. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. But it's absolutely.
I think it's an incredible tank. I mean, way ahead of its time. The concept, the execution, the beauty of it. I mean, yes, it was slow, but who cares? It's just it's a bear, isn't it? It's a proper Russian bear.
Yes, exactly. Very just brutalist, heavy Russian, like fat armor, good enough gun. Oh,
You know, you see it and you can hear the Soviet national anthem.
you really can. It's fucking glorious. So, see, to me, the KV-1 is S tier, personally, but then I'm kind of biased, so I don't know what you think.
I would say it's an A tier.
Okay.
At the end of the day, it was expensive to produce, and it was no more effective than a T-34-85.
It was no more effective than that, but it was produced significantly earlier than that, which made it much more effective in the early
I would still argue that if you can't consider this in the same class as a T-34. I'd say it's a solid A. I totally agree it's a solid A, but it wasn't produced in the numbers, and it didn't have that overall war effectiveness. It's not a war-winning tank.
I guess that's true. It's a very cool tank, but it's not the tank that like turned the tide.
And I mean, come on, we put the Sherman in A. We can't put this in S. We can't put this above the Sherman.
But you don't get Shermans out here knocking out 43 German tanks. All right, I'll stick it.
No, all right, we'll call this an A+. I'll let you have this at A+.
Nice. I'm happy with A+. I'm gonna have to make these things longer. Right.
Or maybe, really, I think possibly we could have a reshuffle and be a bit more selective with our tanks going into A here.
Maybe, yeah. There's a lot of problem is a lot of these tanks are just good tanks. But I think we've got some there are some less good ones coming up.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't even touched on such wonders as the Mouse that I see down there, which I'm not going to lie, that's instantly... We don't even have to consider that. I want to discuss that in full, but we both know where that's going.
Yes, yes, definitely. So, since we did the KV-1, this will probably be quick if we just touch on the KV-2. Personally, I don't know, it has the same strengths and weaknesses, really, I think, as the KV-1. I kind of dislike it because it's a meme tank, and it's popular for being a meme tank.
It's popular for its popularity in World of Tanks.
Yeah, it's like
for that reason,
big gun, very funny.
Also, it did suffer in rough terrain because of its weight.
Yes, and I know that on anything other than flat ground, you basically couldn't traverse the turret. Like, they would tip over. It was a bit of a nightmare.
It was a get it on a train, get it to the battlefield, unload it, win battle, put it back on train.
Yeah. So I would I don't know. I'd probably pop this thing down
I'd argue for a B for this, B+, kind of in between A and B.
Yeah, I'd probably say a B is like a good spot for it, because it's still good, but I don't know. Let's go. Let's go something modern. Let's get the Challenger 2 out there. Oh, I had to get the picture of Megatron, the one from Bovington, because God, it's cool.
There's no argument here. It's an S, obviously.
Obviously,
it's British and it's beautiful.
It is. It's British. It's very pretty. It's
amazing gun, amazing armor.
Yeah, phenomenal. From what I've heard, it's supposed to be one of the best armored tanks in the world, possibly better armored than the Abrams, but I don't know because it's classified.
Well, yeah, it's classified. Yeah, this is the thing. No one knows what Cobham actually is. So.
No one really knows, but what that means is that we can plausibly argue that it's the best tank in the world, and therefore
it's just our government doesn't have the money to produce enough of them.
Yeah, I looked and they made 400. Also, kind of weird that the only countries in the world that use it is us and Oman, because we gave some to Oman, which of all the people to export. I mean, they are our allies, but it's still strange that it's only them that we've exported them to. So yeah,
but who else needs one of those, really?
Yeah, I guess. And people buying
this is another thing as well. Do we actually need tanks as an island nation? No, we don't need tanks. We build tanks for our NATO responsibility, and that's it.
Also, extra points for the cool fluffy jumper thing that it's wearing, the anti-thermals thing.
I love it. I just
Oh.
love everything about it.
It's so nice, and like the
just
whole
gorgeous.
radar suite on top. It's just an extremely attractive tank. So let's stick that firmly up there. There we go. Actually, let's stick that like a little bit higher.
I
we
agree.
go.
I agree with that wholeheartedly.
And let's bring that down like that. There we go. Right.
Now, I noticed that we've favoured Russian. Well, you know, there are some nations that we haven't looked at yet. So let's pick a tank from a different nation, shall we?
Yeah. Let's grab a Char B1.
I was
That's a
hoping you'd
classic.
pick this.
Yeah. What are your thoughts?
Fantastic tank by the standards of the start of the war. Incredibly well armoured. It was a solid tank for the purposes it was designed for, as a defensive infantry tank to support infantry movements and generally hold places and act as kind of an assault breaker, a kind of a mobile fortress to support the fortress elements of the French army at the time. Doctrine-wise, very good tank. Unfortunately, it was never used properly.
Yeah. Absolutely. Like, if the Germans had attacked through the Maginot and there'd been a bunch of Char B1s sitting on the Maginot, that would have been great. They would have gone ham, but that wasn't what happened. And they were split up. From what I've heard, one of the problems was that they were like, rather than being in specific tank units, the tanks were just spread out amongst the whole front line, which meant a lot of the time, if a Char B1 encountered German tanks, there would only be one Char against several German tanks, and it would be essentially a defeat in detail, which was like the problem with French tank doctrine, as far as I've...
Absolutely,
aware.
but it was also very much a problem that the way the French army was organised and the way resupply was used and everything completely muted the very, capable French tanks against a German army that should never have won. There's a fantastic story of Guderian coming up against the French First Armoured, or their equivalent of the French First Army, Brigade d'Armure or something, or whatever it was. The jerry can won the day because the French basically lined up and they were like, right, okay, we're going to do this in the day. And the tender went along and was refueling each tank separately. So they had basically one big fuel tank on a lorry, and they went up the line of tanks from the back and just refilled one tank at a time. And what the Germans did is they had the jerry cans. So they had a truck with a load of jerry cans on, and they'd hand 5 jerry cans to a German tank crew, or 20, or however many it took. And then each of those crews would be able to fill up more or less simultaneously. So the Germans attacked a full hour before the tank in the front of the line was due to be refilled.
Oh my god.
So they attacked a tank with no fuel in it. And of course, because that was the one on the road, no one else could get around it. So they absolutely decimated them.
God. And of course, because the main gun of the Char B1 as well is hull mounted, it's like that's their largest weapon stuck facing forwards, unable to rotate if the tank...
And in an infantry support role, there is nothing wrong with that as a concept. It worked very well on the M3, the Grant. Fantastic concept that did work and did stand up in an infantry support role. However, when faced by an incredibly fast maneuvering army, you're falling short, really. So I think, conceptually a brilliant tank, used terribly by an incredibly incompetent and slow French command system.
Yeah.
I think it looks great as well. It looks,
it's very
looks
cool.
kind of derpy.
It's kind of like it's one of those tanks that's very World War One inspired. Like, you've got the tracks that go kind of all the way around the hull. It's very cool, very interwar. I think as well, from what I've heard, it was one of those tanks that suffered hugely from the one-man turret thing, where the commander is on his own, shoved up there in the turret. And from what I've heard, they didn't even have radios.
No, they didn't. No,
they
the
were
French
communicating through flags, which is ridiculous, especially if you're there in column, suddenly getting surrounded by a mobile German tank force. You don't have time to poke out and be waving flags around to communicate down the column.
But you've got to think, though, no one in the French army expected mobile warfare. They were expecting a static defence. And a
They're
tank
expecting
design,
World War
it's a
One,
tank.
too.
Yeah, exactly. They were. Oh, well, all the Allied commanders were, apart from a select few.
Yeah.
And it was designed for that. And you know what? If the war had been fought like that, as a breakthrough tank to break through a trench line, it's got that long wheelbase, it's got that good rotational track thing, which helps it clear many obstacles. It's got a strong frontal gun to blow holes in the enemy line. It's got a turret to clear trenches as it crosses. It's a good concept for a war that wasn't fought.
Yeah, absolutely. Same
so
sort
for that
of
reason, I'd
philosophy
say
as the Churchill, really.
I love it, but it's got to be about a C for me.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same. Like, really cool tank, but it never. I don't know. It was made for the wrong war. Exactly what you said.
I mean, fundamentally, it's a good tank. Well armored, good gun, good engine, quite reliable apparently, but designed for the wrong war.
Right. What's up next? Should we whack the Tiger out? Should we get this out of the way? Now, I can't remember whether you said you like or you don't like the Tiger.
I like the Tiger, but the Tiger is a terrible tank.
Okay.
Let me expand on that.
Yeah,
the
go off.
The vast majority of tank kills, I think somewhere in the region of almost 90% plus, in World War II were not tank-on-tank action. So the majority of tanks are knocked out by artillery, by mines, and most predominantly by static anti-tank weaponry. The vast majority. As a result, the Tiger's armor scheme it's thick, yes, but it's an outdated armor scheme. It's got straight up, yes, thick, but not angled plates. It's an inefficient use of armor. It's an inefficient use of armor thickness. It says it all that the doctrine in the Tiger handbook recommended you putting it kind of corner on, so that those two flat plates were angled at a kind of 45 degrees corner angle. And that shows in other tank designs. By at the same time, every other tank design was adopting sloped armor because it's by far and away more effective. The gun, the Pak 88, it's a wonderful, wonderful gun, yes, but does it need to be in a tank? Does it need to be in a tank destroyer? Is it not better used as a static? And also you've got to consider the man hours that go into making a Tiger. It took hundreds and hundreds of hours to produce a Tiger tank. You could knock out something like, I think the numbers of Shermans you can knock out to one Tiger in the same amount of time is, I think, around 10 to 1. But also the material, the amount of steel you need, the amount of rare earth minerals you need to produce the engine components, because it had quite a complicated drive system. It took a huge amount of material, skill, time, and space to build the Tiger tank, which effectively meant that it was always going to be fighting against, a kind of overwhelming. It was always going to be a kind of tank that was going to be facing overwhelming odds. Not only to mention that, because it was rushed through development, it had a relatively weak drive system. That meant if an inexperienced driver got hold of it, it was quite easy to break the transmission. Because of the way it was designed, that drive system was actually really quite hard to get to. It had interleaving road wheels, which meant that if you got mud in them, and let's be honest, where it fought, it was either in the desert, where there's a lot of, not mud, but dust, and on the Eastern Front, where there's a heck of a lot of mud, and where that mud was also freezing, effectively it meant that the Tiger basically just froze and got stuck an awful lot. And if you tried to force it out of that mud braking with that transmission, you'd ruin the transmission and effectively knock the tank out before you even got anywhere. The engine wasn't terribly efficient. It had a poor power to rate ratio. It wasn't particularly quick. It was very fuel inefficient as well. It drank a lot of fuel, and one of the biggest problems the Germans had was, of course, having enough fuel to power their fighting vehicles. So effectively, instead of building light, efficient tanks that were maneuverable and could get behind enemy tanks, which they could have still put that 88 on, they built a big box that drank a lot of fuel and ate a lot of steel, effectively. So it's a completely unnecessary tank. And again, it's it's a perfect example of Hitler interfering in the design process. He interfered countless times. He upgunned it. He wanted thicker armor. He wanted wider tracks. And what that meant is that good development work that had gone into a good chassis had to be changed and could not be tested in time. And the end result was an unreliable piece of equipment, and arguably one that was way behind its time in development because it had to be changed so many times. So the armor scheme was outdated, and conceptually it just didn't work. Arguably, you could say it's a tank that lost Germany the war, because it just took up so much time, material, and it was a hugely ineffective tank. Yes, it was scary. Yes, it had a scary gun. Yes, it was hard to knock out. But there were so few of them made that your chances of encountering a Tiger in combat were relatively few. And also, they were quite easily knocked out from the air. And one of the biggest problems the Axis had later in the war was overwhelming Allied air superiority. And if you saw a Tiger coming, you could call in the Air Force, whether it was the US Army Air Force or the RAF, and say, "Oh, we've got a few Tigers holed up in that tree line." You'd call your chaps in the artillery squadron, get them to pour a ridiculous amount of fire on, and the chances are it'd be knocked out, or the crew had just have buggered off because they were terrified.
Yeah. Like, and the thing with the Tiger is because there's so few of them, like it kind of makes them an anomaly to the point where you can afford to do that. Like, running into a normal tank like a Panzer IV or something like that, they're everywhere, and you kind of have to deal with them. But when you're running into a Tiger, there's few enough of them that you can just spot it, back away, and be like, yeah, can we get some tank destroyers up here? Or can we get an airstrike? Or, whatever, get some Typhoons with some fucking rockets on them. Like, it's... You don't just drive at a Tiger. You deal with it some other way. Or you cover it in smoke and then, bring up anti-tank weapons. Like, it's... I don't know. Yeah. And there's that period of time in sort of... I can't remember when it was introduced. Was it 42, 43? Something like that? But then there's that period of time when, like... Yes, that right when it was first introduced, when those start showing up in North Africa and on the Eastern Front, and suddenly it's like, holy shit, what's this? This is scary. This has a lot of armor. But it doesn't actually take long for even anti-tank guns to be developed that can quite easily deal with them. Like, by the time Normandy rolls around, suddenly an awful lot of Allied tanks have weapons that can deal with that armor. You've got Fireflies, you've got Comets, you've got Americans, you've got Shermans with like the larger 76 guns. And so suddenly the one big advantage of the Tiger, well, one of the two big advantages, its armor, it isn't really worth a lot anymore. Because, it's basically a 50-50 between a Tiger and a Firefly, except a Firefly is just a better tank. By far,
and cheaper,
and there's
quicker to make.
And there's a lot more of them, or a Comet, or a T-34-85, or anything like that. So, yeah,
or a Kitty Hawk with a bomb strapped to the bottom of it.
Yep, exactly.
This is the thing. I mean, the Tiger has such a reputation for being this brutally effective tank. It wasn't. In almost every case it saw combat, it was far from effective. Of course there were Tiger aces who were terrifying, but they were ambushing. They had to ambush because they didn't have the maneuverability. And very quickly people realized that they were killable. And as I say, the armor scheme was an armor scheme developed for 1939 doctrine or 1939 tank design thinking. But by the time it entered the war, because of the amount of design delays, largely due to the meddling of Hitler, it was a completely outdated concept. So I think for that reason, I would put the Tiger in E.
E. Wow, we're going the first E. Okay. You know what? Thing is, I think it has to get a few points for being just iconic as hell.
Okay,
like,
all right, okay. So
I would say E plus is
okay. It is still a sexy tank, and we all dream of them, and they're gorgeous. But
and there's that whole thing of it being kind of a psychological weapon, right? Of like, for a lot of the time in the Second World War, in the late war, if an Allied crew saw a tank or if a shell came in, they would shout Tiger. because they would just assume it was a tiger because they were terrified of tigers, even though most of the time it wasn't. Like I think it gets points for reputation.
Okay, D. I'll compromise.
I don't know. See, I could go E plus if you.
No, D. You make a good point, and it's a beautiful piece of kit.
It is pretty cool. All right, D. Now,
if we were talking, I don't think you've got it here, have you? You've not got the Tiger 2.
I don't know.
No, so the Tiger 2 for me would be an F-.
Yes, I would agree. It's just all the problems of the Tiger, but exacerbated. So speaking of Hitler getting too involved in things, should we whack the mouse out? I mean, that's
no discussion needed.
F. Yeah. F. A stupid tank, like never finished, and even if it was finished, like it can't cross bridges. You
can't put it on a train.
You can't put it on a train. The Germans think.
What a lot of people don't realise about wars, well, certainly World War II, is that people didn't just walk from A to B, or tanks didn't drive from Berlin or the factory where they came from to the front. They'd be on a train.
Yeah, and as well, the whole German thing is like, no Allied, tank can penetrate this armor; it'll be unstoppable. Have they forgot that bombs exist? Like, you don't need to penetrate armor if you stick a 500-pound bomb next to it,
or on it,
or
from
on
a plane.
it. Yeah, it's I don't know. This is stupid. It's dumb, waste of steel.
But a waste of steel, a waste of design time, a waste of fuel. It just typifies German idiocy from the top down.
Absolutely, 100%.
I hate it, and it's ugly.
It is ugly as well. It's not like a lot of German tanks are pretty. There's some really nice ones.
Let's be honest, the Tiger is a sexy tank.
It is. It absolutely is.
And I was kind of my heart wanted to give it a C. It really did. My heart, and kind of looking at it, I go, ooh. And when you see videos of Tiger 131 at Bovington, you love it. It's just, and the clanking sound and the look of it and it's just a gorgeous freaking tank, but it's terrible. The only reason it's in D, not F, is because it's a gorgeous tank and it's got that fear factor.
Yeah.
But the mouse has none of those. It's a solid F for me.
It's just got no redeeming features. It looks like a cartoon drawing of a tank. Right.
Well, yeah, because Hitler did it. It is more or less his idea. Go, yeah, if it draws a tank, it will be scary.
His meth-addled brain just more armor, a naval gun. Yes, just fucking god. Right. Let's move on from Germans for a sec. Let's bring out the Chieftain. I don't know an awful lot about its service history or anything. I just brought it out because I think it's really cool.
I do love the idea of the Chieftain. However, I've heard a few stories about the Chieftain, and particularly its engine.
Oh.
Do you know about its engine?
I don't know about its engine.
So the Chieftain, I believe it is the Chieftain, had a the idea, the design idea behind the Chieftain was that it was expected to fight in a theatre of war post-nuclear attack. So
right.
Supply lines might have been stretched. They might have needed to use anything they could get their hands on for fuel. So it had a multi-fuel engine.
Oh yeah,
which wasn't it
designed so you could...
horrendously shit.
Yeah, wasn't it designed so you could basically stick any type of fuel in it and it would run?
Yeah, petrol, diesel, vegetable oil, literally anything. The problem is that concept was great as a concept. The execution, however, was atrociously bad, and I think there was never more than 50% of Chieftain deployed at any time, because the other half of them were in the workshop.
Really? Was it that bad?
It was woefully bad. It looks great. The gun is great. The armor apparently was pretty good. However, there were less than half of them ever deployed on service at any time because they were so unreliable. The kind of unreliability that Tiger would probably go, we're not that bad.
Wow.
Yeah, it woeful design. Woefully bad.
Oh, interesting. Well, I've learnt something today. I had no idea.
I knew nothing about this, and I was listening to one of Nicholas Moran's tank chats, and he was just like, "It's a great tank, apart from the engine, but unfortunately, you need an engine."
Yeah, you can't do much without an engine. Wow. Okay, whereabouts would you put this then?
I'd actually say probably a D.
A D. Okay.
Well, because to be effective, you've actually got to be able to fight.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah, that's based on what you've just said about it. That's D sounds accurate. D sounds like a good place.
I mean,
for it.
don't get me wrong. The thing is, it's British and it looks pretty. I'd love to put it more towards B and A, but the fundamental fact is that if it's only going to get halfway to the front line, it's not much use, is it?
Gonna break down before it reaches A. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Speaking of the Russians, shall we get the old T-34 out? Why don't we?
Oh, what a patriotic picture as well.
Yeah, I know. I went with photographs for most of them, but this, I don't know. It was just a good picture. Yeah, interesting. Is that a German half track behind it? I think it is. Yeah.
That's
might be a captured one or something.
Someone getting carried away.
Yeah.
Right. Now, you're the Russian tank boy. I'll let you start on this one.
See, problem is, I'm a Russian tank boy for certain Russian tanks. The T-34 is, like, not one of my favorites, so I don't know a huge amount about it. I know that it was, like, I mean, one of the first things you learn about World War II in school is that history teachers adore the T-34. And they tell you it was the best tank of the war. Or at least that was what my history teacher always said. But then I disagreed with him on a number of things. But I do know the T-34 was huge. I mean, the T-34 85 especially, it's proven itself in that it's still in use today with some small militaries and insurgent groups and things. And that's incredible. Like, it's exceedingly rare that you get a tank from Second World War in use that long afterwards.
It's because it's so simple.
Yeah.
I think that the genius of the T-34 is that the Sherman was designed with the might of American and British industry behind it, in that it could be repaired by a skilled team of engineers that was available with enough spare parts to make it work. You know, it had this huge infrastructure behind it, and it was designed with that in mind, and that's why it was such a good tank. The T-34 is equally as brilliantly designed because it was designed to be able to be driven and run by people who could fix tractors. So the reason the T-34's drive is the way it is because it was designed to be similar to tractors that were used by most Russian farmers. So that, as far as I'm aware anyway, and the idea of this being is that you could stick, you know, young Ilyushkin or, you know, Pushkin or whatever, and go, all right, hop in this. Have you driven a truck? Have you driven a tractor? Yes, Commandant. Okay, you can drive this. You know, have 2 hours, and they'd be like, yeah, okay, I need a sledgehammer to change gear, but yeah, I can drive it. And that idea in its own right is genius. The fact that it had that sloped armor, genius. The fact they put the 85 in it, genius. The fact that they built it rough and ready and didn't really care, genius. There are examples of T-34s where you can fit your hands between the welds in the armor plate on the back of them.
Yeah, I've heard about some of the, like, factory modifications. Like, apparently T-34s, like, you could tell which factory it came out of because factories would just make their own changes based on what spare parts weren't available, and they would, like, improvise. Like, that's how kind of simple they were, is that you know, you can be missing several parts and it'll probably still run. Like, or at least run well enough to go and shoot a few German tanks before it breaks down.
It wasn't designed to be around. It was designed to go into combat, get knocked out, and go again.
Yeah.
It was designed to be fixed by a peasant with a spanner and a hammer. It's such an elegantly simple, crude, but brilliant piece of design.
And actually, that reminds me of the I can't remember whether this was a T-34 factory or a different factory, but the famous tank factories at Stalingrad. Whilst the battle was happening within the city itself, the factory was still pumping out tanks, and what would happen is a tank would go out of the factory, drive a couple hundred meters up the road, get shot and knocked out, and then get towed back into the factory and have new parts put in it and then roll back out again. Like, that's such a Russian thing to do. I love it. Yeah, so absolutely iconic tank, absolutely sort of game-changing tank. I mean, I know it was one of the first to like properly introduce sloped armor.
I think you've got to put this in at S.
Yes, I would agree with that. Big S for the T-34. Fucking great tank. Yeah, and from what I've heard, it was supposed to be one of the least comfortable tanks of the war, but then it's the Soviets. So, like,
yeah, well, I mean, it's not like they care.
Yeah. And if someone's not comfortable, they're just,
well, then they get
chuck
shot,
him.
so.
Yeah, chuck him in a ditch and get someone else to go and drive the tank. Yeah. Next up, we've not actually got too many left. How about we whack out the old thing? First World War. I think this is a Mark IV, but this can just apply to any First World War. Mark 1, Mark whatever.
The tank.
The tank, the land ship. Yeah, I fucking love these things. They I mean, I'd say they're probably less impactful on tank design in general than the FT. And I think the FT, there's a good chance the FT was probably better. I don't really know the statistics or anything like that.
I think better's not necessarily the right one, maybe more effective. I think as the kind of the arguably the first tank. It's iconic, isn't it? It's absolutely iconic. It was slow. It gave the crew carbon monoxide poisoning from the engine.
Yeah.
The Sponson idea was bizarre and strange. It was it was relatively unreliable.
But it was the first. Like, it was the first time anyone had done this.
And it scared the shit out of the Germans.
Yeah. Yeah. And like it kind of did its job. It was a big metal wall for the infantry to sit behind. And it wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be, because it was better than just walking with nothing in front of you at all. And I love how clearly you can see that it was built by the Navy. Like, I mean, it's like,
oh yeah,
the term land ship is so perfect for it, because it is like a little battleship, like with the casemate guns on the sponsons. Even like the shape of it, it's just great. Absolutely,
I love it. I love the shape, the Lozon shape, and I love the tracks. I love the sound of them. I love the look of them. I love everything about them. I really do. I think they're just magnificent.
Yeah, and like
magnificent pieces of British engineering.
And seeing the way they're able to traverse like trenches and difficult terrain, like it's actually really well designed. The shape of it, like it's perfect for the First World War battlefield.
It was also slow. It did also give the crew carbon monoxide poisoning. And it wasn't actually all that effective in its role.
Was it not?
Well, I mean, there were breakthroughs, but they weren't supported very well. People didn't really know what to do, and they never really got very far. So, yeah, I would say the Renault FT deserves its place in S, because it's so iconic, and it is the first tank. And I would say this, I think it deserves a B, because yes, it is the grandfather of all tanks. But as an effective war-winning tool, was it war-winning? I would argue no.
I mean, it wasn't war-winning, that's for sure. Like, I think without them, things would have gone pretty much the same. But I do still think it was an enormous breakthrough in technology.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, for its impact in the wider world of tanks, I mean, obviously it is the first. You can't take that away from it. But the Renault FT was an effective fighting vehicle, and it was an effective breakthrough vehicle. Cambrai is probably the greatest example of these tanks being used en masse. And were they widely effective there? No. I don't know. I'd put it at a bit. Well, say, what have we got at B? We've got the T-50.
a B plus maybe.
I'd say a B plus. I'd say a B plus is fair to it.
I'd compromise on a B plus. Nice. Right. I think the main reason I wanted it to be high is because, oh god, it looks cool.
Yeah.
When are they gonna bring back sponsons, man?
In Warhammer.
Yeah, god. Oh, the 40k tanks that are like based off these are so cool.
Yeah, to be fair, that's why I'm slightly biased towards it.
Right.
If I was judging it on how much I liked it, it would be a solid S. It really would. But I'm trying to be objective.
Yeah, that's fair. Right. How about
Failing a bit.
Let's whack out. Let's get the Russians out of the way. Let's whack out the old IS-2. God, that's a horribly low res picture.
It is a bit.
I'll find a better one to put like on the video. So what do you have thoughts on the IS-2 or the IS series in general?
The IS series is a terrifying series of tanks. I would argue it's an unnecessary series of tanks. And I would argue that actually heavy tanks in general were largely unnecessary. But they're freaking good, aren't they? The gun's incredible. They look terrifying. The rounded turret was stupendously thick, arguably impenetrable with anything from the day. They just look Russian and terrifying and incredibly awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Like that, the armor, like, you know, an 88 is going to have a very hard time getting through it. That's a 122mm gun. That's massively bigger than anything the Germans were using on their tanks. I mean, okay, sure, technically they had the 128mm on a couple of things, but like that doesn't really count. You know, the Jagdtiger doesn't really count. But like, yeah, that gun. The only thing about the gun, interestingly, I found out recently, is that it was a gun not made for tanks. It was made as a naval gun, which meant that it had a very... I can't remember whether it was because it was like a two-stage ammunition thing, but basically the ammunition was not designed for use in a tank, and so it was incredibly awkward to load. So it would take like up to a full minute to load the gun. So it had a horrendously slow rate of fire. But then with a gun that big, you don't need a massive rate of fire, to be honest. Like, if you can hit the target, it's dead.
Doesn't matter anyway.
Yeah, you can just shrug off hits all you like while you're busy loading your gun. Yeah.
I mean, so from sheer point of it a tank, and I love it. You can't hate it. I just think it's bonkers and wonderful and Russian and stupid. But it's stupid. It's an unnecessary tank.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think when the IS-2 was first introduced, I think well, the I series in general, I think they served quite an important role in that they were the counter to the Tigers. And I mean, yes, the T-30. Well, the T-34 did that. Yeah, they did that as well. Well, rather, I think the IS-2 is more a counter for the Tiger 2s, right? And the heavy German tank destroyers. Well, there weren't many.
This is okay. So this is my point: is it's an unnecessary tank because it was well over the threshold of anything it would come up against ever. It was too good, and therefore I would argue that it was totally unnecessary. And at the end of the day, the IS series of heavy tanks, and indeed heavy tank development in the USSR was suspended because it was realised that it was far better to have an all-round useful tank, an MBT, and then reconnaissance vehicles than heavy, medium, and light tanks. And I think arguably the IS and the amount of material you need for it, the size of the thing, the difficulty to transport, it's kind of its own worst enemy. It's too good of a tank. You don't need something that good. It costs too much to make. It's too big. It's too heavy. It's too hard to move. It uses too much fuel. It's too hard to supply. It doesn't carry enough ammunition. It's too much tank. And I can't believe I'm saying that, but it's too much tank. It's great, but it's too much.
Too much tank. Yeah. I mean, what?
I mean, if you get what I'm saying with it, I mean, I know
Yeah.
I'm kind of unfair to it because it is a brilliant piece of bonkers design, but it's unnecessary. It's too much of something as the KV2. I think it's effectively suffered from that same problem of there's an alternative, which is the T-34-85, which is just as effective, quicker, cheaper, easier to build, easier to maintain, and if one gets knocked out, it doesn't matter.
It's a point. It's a point. I mean, it's interesting trying to figure out where to place it because it is a very good tank, but also, you know, like you're saying, maybe not entirely necessary. So I don't know.
I would say I'd be comfortable putting this at a kind of like a B+ level.
Yeah, I was thinking.
I would
B-ish.
argue strongly for a B, but I totally get what you're saying, and I do agree it's a brilliant tank. It really is, but it was built for a role that was never needed, and by the time that it kind of would have been entering arguments about Cold War tanks, and okay, it's got to come up against its American contemporaries. By that point, the Americans were mounting guns that could defeat its armor. So, by the time it kind of entered an argument where it was relevant, it was no longer relevant.
But then, by the time you're getting into Cold War stuff, I mean, at the Victory Parade in Berlin, 1945, they already had the IS-3 out, and the IS-3 was a monster. It was just the IS-2, but massively up armored again, and I think with the same gun. But apparently, because the Russians have been very secretive about it, the Victory Parade in Berlin was the first time any of the Western powers had actually seen the IS-3, and they were bloody terrified because they knew, like, before the Second World War ended, obviously everyone knew that there was tensions with Russia, and they knew that they'd kept it secret and brought it out here as like an intimidation move. But apparently these were just like the IS-3 at the time. You know, I remember I was reading a book a little while ago by a guy called Bill Bellamy, who was a Cromwell commander, and him and his crew were at the Victory Parade, and when they saw the IS-3, it was saying it was the biggest tank they'd ever seen. It was a monster. Like they'd never imagined a tank that huge, and there he is with his Cromwell, like. There's just no, there's no comparison. But like, I mean, the thing is, the IS-3 I would say is even more unnecessary than the IS-2 because you're getting later in years, you're getting into then early Cold War territory, and heavy tanks are becoming obsolete. But the Russians carried on with the ISs for years. I know they experimented all the way up to I think the IS-10, something like that.
Yeah,
where they just got heavier and heavier.
And arguably more pointless and more pointless.
Yeah. And that's why they gave up and just went with tanks like the T-55, T-62s, because they
realised like no matter how much armour you can put on the tank, there's always going to be a gun or a plane or something that can defeat it.
Yeah, just more steel isn't the solution.
Isn't necessarily the way. No.
Cool. Right. So we've only got British and German tanks left.
Oh. Perfect.
So I guess we can alternate. Let's start with the Germans since we've got more Germans. Panzer IV. Oh, cracking tank. Less Tigers, brilliant. More of these, please.
Absolutely. You know, so many different design variants. Not an overly complicated drive system. Easily upgunnable, easily upgradable. I mean, I love them. I think they're brilliant. I think they look great. They look tanky. They served so many different roles as well. They were so flexible. They were relatively reliable for a German piece of machinery. They were still over-engineered, don't get me wrong. Like, for instance, Panzer IVs had an azimuth ring in them, which is basically something that when you're in the turret, it will always show you where the front of the tank is.
Okay.
Most other countries realised that, of course, you could just look at the hatch. Or look out your periscope and work out where that was. But the Germans over-engineered everything.
Or even if you look down into the tank beneath you, you can probably tell which way is forwards.
Yes, exactly. It's not hard. But the Germans, being Germans, were like, "Nein, we need this azimuth ring." And so they built it in. And again, that took like, you have to build an entire cog system around the turret ring and the turret and the gears and levers and all sorts. And it's that kind of thing would take 2 days. So what's the point? There's no point. So it suffers from the same kind of German over-engineered, over-finished kind of problems, but it's a beautiful tank. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, absolutely, I agree. Like it's got those over-engineering problems, but to a much lesser extent, thankfully, than some of the worst offenders. And it's iconic. It's as you say, it's a very tanky tank. It's just standard looking. It's like the German equivalent of the Sherman, where it's just a nice standard looking tank. It's a lot easier mass producible than some of the heavies. And like the upgradability of it is, I can't really think of anything else like it, because you look at an early war Panzer IV versus a late war Panzer IV, in only 5-6 years they've changed drastically. Like they're almost a completely different tank from the beginning to the start of the war.
Wider tracks, thicker armor, different guns, different turrets,
and you've got modifications of them. Like if you need an anti-aircraft platform, you got the Wirbelwind or the Ostwind. You need an assault gun, you've got the Stug 4s. Or the Stug 3s if you're using a Panzer III. You've got howitzer pieces stuck on them. The Panzer IV is great, and it's so kind of standardized for that. Like you can stick anything on it, you can use it for pretty much anything. So fantastic tank. I would be probably thinking like an A+ for this, maybe.
I'd say again though, purely from a pragmatic point of view, it is slightly over-engineered. It does unfortunately suffer from those fact that it's a relatively early war design. It still has those flat frontal glacis areas.
It does.
It doesn't have sloped sides. The turret forward is relatively flat, though thick.
The armor is definitely a weakness. Like a short barrel Sherman would have no problem dealing with this.
Yeah, exactly.
But then it a later war.
Well, depending on the model, they did upgrade the armor significantly.
Yeah, but
to be able to withstand that kind of thing.
But then also a later war, one of these would also have no problem dealing with a Sherman in most cases. So
absolutely.
It's
I would argue an A-, B+ for this.
Okay.
Maybe an A.
I think I'd have to go for A. Maybe B and 3/4. So like.
Okay, it's slightly less than a full A.
Very slightly less, but like not quite a B+. Cool.
Yeah,
right.
and only because realistically, and again, it's not necessarily the tank's fault. It was forced to serve far later than realistically other tanks of other armies were.
Yeah.
And it performed very capably against them. So, all credit to it. But unfortunately, because of the demands placed on the German army, it was required that it evolve beyond its realistic capacity to evolve, and even then, it did a good job of doing that. So, credit to it. I'd say it's a solid nearly an A.
Yeah, and interestingly, as far as I understand it, the Panzer IV. So at the beginning of the war, the way it was kind of intended was that the Panzer III with its 50mm was the tank killer, and the Panzer IV with the short barrel 75 was an infantry support weapon. It was for taking out fortified targets, hitting soft targets, that sort of thing. So it wasn't even designed to really be fighting tanks. Until it was then retrofitted with the longer barrel 75, later on in the war. So yeah, interesting change of roles. But right, let's go on to a British one. We gotta whack my boy out, the Cromwell. One of my absolute favorite tanks of all time. I mean, the stories of Cromwell's. I mean that Cromwell troop leader I mentioned, Bill Bellamy, his book Troop Leader is fantastic. It's really, really good read. I recommend it. He has so many stories of Cromwell's. Like, these things were just very reliable. They didn't have much armor, but they didn't need it. Their gun was a pretty standard 75, so it can deal with a Panzer IV no problem. It can't really deal with a Tiger, but then it's quick enough that it'll run away if it sees a Tiger. And they were not only were they brilliant cavalry tanks, used to engage the enemy, with incredibly high speed, but also they were fantastic as reconnaissance tanks. Like quite often, especially during the Normandy campaign, a troop of 3 or 4 Cromwells would just zip off behind enemy lines, find a hill, go up and sit on the hill miles behind the actual front line, camouflage the tanks, and just sit on the hill for a couple of days and radio back with what was going on. Like, you can't do that with other tanks. You can't do that with a Sherman, but you can do it with a Cromwell. And there was, I think I told you this story before, but I'll tell it for the sake of the thing. There was this amazing story where this guy Bill Bellamy, him and his troop were zooming around Normandy one day, just speeding along, wind in his hair, and they come across a German anti-aircraft position. So there's some 20 mils, there's an 88 mil, and there's some infantry about, and it's like, okay, 20 mils aren't going to be a problem, but the 88 is definitely a problem, and they've just essentially gone through a hedgerow and come across this by accident. So they're like, okay, let's get the hell out of here. So they turn around, but because of the landscape where they are, they end up having to jump 20 feet across it was a river, a canal. It was a 20-foot canal that each tank had to jump across in order to escape. And they all did it fine. And in no other tank are you going to be jumping 20-foot canals. Like, just the fact that it's a tank that could do that is fantastic. And apparently after the engagement, the lead Cromwell, they noticed that there were a bunch of 20mm rounds sticking out of the frontal armor plate, like stuck in like darts. And that was weird, because that's not what happened. That's not what shells do. They don't stick out of armor plates like darts. And so they went back to the quartermaster and were like, hey, our tank's a bit weird. Have you seen this? And the quartermaster checked the serial number of the tank, and it turned out that it had actually been a training tank and not a combat tank. And that the training tank had been accidentally issued to them. So it didn't have hardened armor. It had soft steel armor or something. And he was like, right, you guys really shouldn't be driving this thing. We'll get you a proper tank. But they refused, and they kept the training tank because it was good luck. And also, because it didn't have hardened armor, it was faster than the other Cromwells. So that was kind of an advantage. So that's just a nice story about Cromwells. I'm a big fan. What are your thoughts?
I mean, look, I love them. I think they're brilliant. I think they're just pretty, aren't they? They're just pretty.
Like that nice boxy hull, nice boxy turret. Also, again, with the massive modifiability, you had so many tanks based off that Cromwell chassis. As soon as the 17-pounders start getting introduced, you've got the Comet, the Challenger, the Avenger, loads of variants. I think the Centaur was one with a howitzer on it, something like that.
Yeah, I believe it was called that. Yeah.
Yeah, but that Cromwell chassis, people loved it.
I just love it. I think it looks great. It's just gorgeous, isn't it? It's just, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I don't know what else to say.
That's the thing.
A great tank.
There's not much else to say. It's just fantastic. Where would you put this?
I can't put it anywhere other than A. I don't think it quite deserves an S, because S, we've got the rarefied. S is rarefied.
S is a war-winning tanks, right? S is, we've got the Abrams, the T-34, the FT,
and we've got the granddaddy of all tanks. S is the kind of super tank.
Yeah. So it's not up there, but it's a fantastic tank. So yeah, I would agree with an A. We're running out of space. I'll pop it there with the Firefly, and I'll angle it a bit so it's doing a bit of a jump. There we go.
I think the problem is we both really like tanks.
This is it.
It's quite hard to slate a tank.
Yeah, I should have picked more bad tanks.
Yeah, you've gone for tanks we both really like, which is and it says it all, really, that I suppose this is it. The Tiger is one of the lowest scoring tanks we've got.
Yeah. And the only thing below the D is a mouse, and that the mouse was just in there basically as a joke anyway, since that was obviously going to get F. Right, that was a British.
I think we should definitely have included more Italian tanks just to populate the lower end of the table a bit.
Yes, I think part 2 is going to be a lot more shitty tanks for sure. Maybe some more Frenchies, definitely some Italians, maybe some Swedish tanks. Those are fun. Right.
Yeah, but there's definitely some interesting content out there that we haven't covered.
Absolutely. I think there's going to be a few more high tier tanks as well. Right. Onto the Stug. I have a Stug T-shirt. I like the Stug a lot. I've also got a Stug model on my windowsill, although it's years old and sadly it's falling apart a little bit.
I struggle with putting this in with this group.
All right.
Because it's not technically a tank, is it? It's a tank destroyer. It's a self-propelled gun.
Yeah, it's an assault gun. It's a tank destroyer. I don't know.
I honestly, I would say for this, I would leave this out of this conversation. All right. And I think we should come back and do a tank destroyer one.
We'll do a tank destroyer one. That'll be good. We can have like the Hellcat and stuff. All right, we'll leave the
exactly. We can have the Jagdpanzer and the Jagdtiger.
Lots of good German ones. There's the Archer.
Well,
which is
lots of
British
silly German
tank.
ones as well. There's lots of great Russian ones. There's what's that American the ridiculous American four track one.
Oh my god, the T95, I think.
T95, that's it. So yeah, that category I think is great for a next one. So I think we should save the Stug for that.
And there's a lot of silly ones, so that'll be good. Yeah, all right, we'll save the Stug.
I think that's a good one. I think the Stug will do very well in that, but
yeah,
I think we could populate that one with an awful lot more E's and F's.
yes, definitely. Because there are some terrible designs. Right.
Oh, I love it.
Okay, in that case, let's work out
funnier names as well.
The Panzer II. Oh, look at this handsome German chap up there.
Oh, hello. Is that anyone we know?
I don't think so. I think it's just a Panzer II commander. So do you? I know you obviously know quite a lot about what the Germans got up to in the early war. Do you have opinions on the Panzer II?
I think it was a tank that did what it was designed to do very well. It was quick, it was effective, it was nimble, it was easy to refuel. It wasn't very upgradable. It had a poor armament considering late war tanks, but at the end of the day, it was never expected to knock out enemy tanks.
Yeah,
for a weapon of war for its day, it was a very effective weapon.
Yeah, very much a reconnaissance tank.
There was a disturbing lack of fighting in the Battle of France. And when any staunch opposition was put up, the Panzer 1s, Panzer 2s, Panzer 3s basically ground to a halt because their armour was good enough to defeat small arms fire, but anything more serious, not really capable of defeating it. They were quick, but they weren't mad quick, but they were quick enough to outfox anything that the French could throw up. And largely, though, that was because of radio. Not necessarily because of the speed of the tank or the speed of operation. It was the decisive ignoring of high command orders by Guderian and various other tank commanders. Rommel, Guderian, so on and so forth. Is it a good tank? Kind of. Is it groundbreaking in any way? No. Was it immensely pivotal in the Battle of Poland? No. Again, when faced with significant opposition, ground to a halt because it was good, but it wasn't strong enough armor to really wade into massive amounts of enemy fire. I would honestly say its quality its perceived quality far outweighs its actual quality. Okay. You'd have been just as well served to be in a half-track or a truck in the Battle of France, because the value of the tank as a fighting vehicle is because it was quick.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, because even for 1939, it's you know, it's lightly armored.
Horrendously outdated.
Yeah, it's not. It's got what, a 20mm gun. Like that's not going to deal with many. Like,
but it's not
French
designed
tanks. I know. Yeah, of course it's not. But it's it's. I think it's not so much that it was a good tank. It's just that it was used very well.
I would say if you could crop out the tank commander and put him in A and put the tank down in C, I think I'd be happy with that.
All right, let me see if I can.
It deserves a C because it played a pivotal role in one of the great battles of history. Drive closer and let me hit with my sword. But arguably the praise there goes to the tank commanders, not the tank itself.
Yeah, the very large tank commanders. Right, okay, German tank man going up here. He can squeeze in there. There we go. And then Panzer II. Where was this going? C, was it?
I mean, have you got an argument either which way with that?
Not a huge. I mean, I don't really know a huge lot about it, to be honest. But everything you've said kind of made sense, and I'd agree with that. So, where was it that you said? Did you say D or?
I said C. I
said C. Yeah, that sounds.
I think
right.
Because of its role, you know, it did play a pivotal role. It was important. It does deserve a C, but no more than that.
Yes, I would agree with that. Right, next up, British one. Let's whack the Churchill out. Again, one of my possibly my favorite tank, but I think naming a favorite tank is kind of difficult. But it's among my.
It's
favorites.
Very difficult.
I think it very much, in terms of aesthetics, I think it follows the land ship thing. Like to me, it looks like a warship, just the shape of it, and you can so see how it's built. I mean, I think it was designed by the same people who designed the first tanks in the First World War. The I think they called it the Old Boys Club or something like, not the Old Boys Club. It was something like that.
That designed the TOG.
Yeah, the same guys who designed the TOG. I think they were involved with the Churchill. I'll find it later. But yeah, no, it was. I don't know. I just love the Churchill. Like, I really like the British tank ideas of the
infantry, cavalry.
Yeah, the infantry tank and the cavalry tank. I think it's a really cool idea. I don't know enough about them to know whether they succeeded or whether they were a bad idea. Like, I don't know, but it's a really cool. It's just a cool concept. Like the fact that it was just designed to be as heavy and slow as possible, so that it wouldn't leave the infantry behind, and because it was specifically an infantry support weapon, and so many tanks in the past or tank crews had been guilty of abandoning the infantry, and essentially leaving them on their own. It's great. Also, a Churchill was the first tank to knock out a Tiger, so points for that.
Yeah, true.
I think from the Mark 7 onwards, they were massively up armored to have 152 mil of armor, which a lot of the time is going to stop at 88. An 88 could knock out a Churchill, but it would have to be lucky.
And close.
Yes, and it's people talk about the Tiger being heavily armored, but the Churchill had a lot more armor than the Tiger did. It was a thick boy.
And as far as I'm aware, from stories I've heard, the Churchill was in fact a very successful tank and because of course you've got to consider as well that the Churchill wasn't just used on the Western Front; it was exported in great numbers and arguably more used on the Eastern Front.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
was incredibly successful at stopping German armoured advances.
Yeah, and it's supposed to be one of the most survivable tanks of the war as well. And not just because of armor, but because it has so many ways for the crew to escape. So unlike pretty much any other tank, it's got those hatches in the sides of the hull. So the driver and the hull machine gunner, if the tank is burning, not only can they potentially climb out of the turrets the hatches directly over their heads, but they've also got hatches next to them on either side of the tank that they can climb out sideways if it's too dangerous to climb out the top. And there's 3 different hatches in the turret. Apparently it was...
Interestingly, an awful lot of the tanks we've discussed do have bottom escape hatches as well.
Do they? Oh, I knew that. Yeah. I believe the Shermans did, but I don't know about.
Quite a lot of them do. A lot of the German ones did as well, and a lot of the more modern tanks do as well.
Okay, I didn't know that. Oh, that's cool. But yeah, it was the Churchill was supposed to be loved by its crews, just largely because of that. It was massively survivable. And
I
also,
mean, you can see that armor thickness in that image there. You see where their front viewport is open.
oh yeah,
That plug of armor that goes in there. It's ridiculous. It's
I love
absolutely
that.
ridiculous.
I love
is
that
brilliant.
viewport. It's so like it.
Well, it
It's
used
such
to
a
have a gun in it, didn't it? The Churchill Mark 1 had a hull-mounted gun.
yeah. Oh yeah, it had like a little howitzer, didn't it? Like a little 76 mil or something like that.
Like a Shah.
Yeah.
Totally useless, but
Terrible, but like yeah. But that's
I
such
love
a
it.
Weird,
I think it's brilliant.
It's such a weird design for a driver's like little viewport though, having the plug. Like I love that no one else did anything like that. Man. But yeah, and you get some of the best variants of tanks as well. Like there are some amazing Churchill variants, like the AVRE with the massive demolition charge launcher. You've got the Churchill bridge layers. You've got like the Churchill crocodile. Oh man, the crocodiles were supposed to be terrifying. Like there are stories of crocodiles. Apparently what they would often do was, these were the flamethrower tanks, is that they would if they approached a German bunker or something that they were going to light up, quite often they would spray fuel all over it, but not actually light the fuel, and just
I've heard about this.
And just the experience of being covered with fuel from a flamethrower would terrify the Germans enough that they would flee and surrender, because they know that they're going to get set on fire in a minute. Like that, I don't know. I just love that as an idea. So Churchills, yes. Also, apparently, it was the old gang, is what those designers called themselves.
Oh yeah.
The old gang, which is just such a British thing for like an official designation for a group of tank designers. Yeah, so Churchill good. I don't know, I'm thinking A tier maybe, because again, I don't think it's quite worthy of S, but like it's a very good.
I think we've been overly generous with our A tiering, to be honest.
I think we have.
I feel like we could probably do with going back over this and knocking a few down.
Yeah.
I don't think the Churchill deserves A tier, simply because of what else is in A tier. I would say it deserves a B+, because it wasn't as versatile as the Sherman. It wouldn't have stood up as well in multiple theatres of combat. It's
right.
not as good as a Cromwell.
It's not.
It's a B. It's a B for me. I'm willing to give it a B+ because you love it so much, but you've got to consider its viability as a war weapon. Yes, it was great, but it was also slow.
I guess there's only so many things it's good at.
Exactly. It's a limited scope, isn't it? You know. And also, in Normandy, the Comet was successful because it was quick, and fighting over Bocage, you know, that really kind of like hedgerowy, ditchy, really tough ground. The Churchill, you know, wasn't necessarily as effective because it didn't have the maneuverability.
You know what? I can accept that it is worthy of a B. I can accept that.
It's definitely worthy of a B. I would never dream of putting it lower than a B. But I think for the same reason, we've got stuff like the IS, the KV2, and stuff like that in there. The Churchill is a B tank for me.
Yeah.
My heart wants to put it higher, but my brain says no.
That's the thing. It's still probably my favourite tank, but yeah, no, I would agree.
I think we should have defined our terms before we set out on this venture. On how are we rating these, rather than just like throwing them around.
I kind of like that it's been a bit chaotic and subjective, though. God,
I do, and it's like sometimes tempered with rationale, and other times just like well.
Yeah. Right.
Can I grab a quick drink before
go
we carry on?
Go for it. Now, unfortunately, when Ed went to get a drink, I stopped the recording, and I forgot to resume it again once he came back. So we lost the footage of the last two tanks. Well, I shouldn't say we lost it, I lost it. But just so you know, we put the Matilda in B tier, the Queen of the Desert, and the Panther in C tier, because it's not great, but it's better than the Tiger. I'll be very impressed if anyone made it this far. please let me know. Like, comment if you did, because I'm genuinely curious. But thank you very much for watching and or listening. And we're definitely going to do more of these because this was a lot of fun. And hopefully we'll make it shorter. Probably sub 1 hour, I think, would be the goal. Or maybe not. Maybe people will like stupidly long videos. Anyway, thanks very much. See you around.